what an educational institution has to do and ought to be doing. And I'm glad that our own faculty have risen to the occasion. So I want to thank the Geography and Economics Department for hosting this event and for inviting Madam. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Father, for your very kind words and setting a tone to the discussion today. I would now like to request Ms. Devasmita Datta, Assistant Professor, Department of Economics, Salesian College, to kindly introduce our speaker for today. Thank you. Over to you, Devasmita ma'am.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to take a few minutes to introduce Professor Sanchadi Roy Mukherjee to the National Webinar Series on Communities and Food Systems, Land, Labor and Migration, hosted by the Department of Economics and the Department of Geography in collaboration with IQAC. We are extremely thankful to Professor Mukherjee to have her present on this webinar. I would like to illustrate briefly on her glorious career as a renowned teacher and a deft administrator before starting with the proceedings. Professor Sanchadi Roy Mukherjee has been engaged in postgraduate teaching at the Department of Economics, North Bengal University over the last 32 years. Having graduated from Presidency College, Kolkata, she completed her master's in economics from the University of Calcutta. Soon after, she joined the North Bengal University as a lecturer in economics and has been continuing ever since. In her career, spanning almost over 32 years at North Bengal University, she also completed her PhD in infrastructure economics. Professor Mukherjee has also served as the director for the Center for Women's Studies at North Bengal University for a prolonged period of time. She has traveled widely on academic assignments to several European countries, the US, and to the Southeast Asia. She has several national and international journal publications to her credit. She also possesses the distinction of completing several major projects under the aegis of the MHRD, the UGC, and the ICSSR. She has singularly discharged her administrative duties in various capacities within and outside the university, earning praise and respect from all. She has been a panel member of various committees and a UGC nominee in governing bodies of various colleges in Eastern India. Presently, she is serving as the Dean of the Faculty Council of PG Studies in Arts, Commerce, and Law of North Bengal University. In short, I would like to reiterate our gratitude to her again for agreeing to grace this webinar on such a short notice. We'll look forward to having a lovely session hearing you and strive for our fellow students to gain some valuable insight from it.
Thank you, Devasmita ma'am, for the brief introduction that might just shed a light upon some aspects of pages long of CV that ma'am possesses under her credit. And I cannot thank ma'am enough to have agreed to grace our event with a very important looking lecture today that concerns us all today, the plight of migrant laborers during this pandemic. We might have had several discussions over this issue lately, and we would love to hear some insights into this from Madam Professor Sanchadi Roy Mukherjee. Please, ma'am, over to you. You could take over from here.
Thank you, Vicky, and thank you, Devasmita. You are just like my students from addressing you by name. A very good morning to all the listeners and attendees. And I'm indeed feeling very privileged to be invited to speak at this webinar, jointly organized by the Department of Economics, and Department of Geography, Salesian College, Siliguri. I'm indeed thankful to Father George Kadatil, a friend and a patron and chairman IQAC, convener Father George Chempa Katina, vice principal of the college and vice principal of the college Father Aju Korean, and coordinator of IQAC Siliguri campus, and also to the co-conveners, my young colleagues, Dr. Vipul Chhetri and Mr. Dipesh Sharma of the college. And I'm indeed thankful to the college for organizing this webinar on a very special and topical issue concerning communities and food systems, focusing on land, labor, and migration. And I also express my heartiest greetings to my esteemed fellow speakers from different corners of the globe. Now, I'll be highlighting on the plight of the migrant workers amidst the pandemic. Now, this is an issue which is really not spot on with us, but also throughout the world. Now, although this is an academic webinar, but it is very difficult for me to speak devoid of any emotion on this topic. Now, as the migrant laborers from different parts of India took a big leap to walk back home in distress and under insurmountable circumstances, journeying on foot after lockdown, dragging their children and family with the belief in their heart that once they reach home, they will be free to live their lives with dignity amongst family members and relatives, and who would not turn their face away and let them die of hunger. Yes, this is exactly what their fear was, dying of hunger in the absence of work, wages, and any form of security, especially food security. They were going back to their origin, their roots, to their village, which had nothing to offer them in the first instance. And that is the reason they had left the village in search of work or employment. And now they were returning because the land that had held promises for them had turned away their faces and denied their existence. Well, their origin also has nothing to offer during the pandemic. No jobs, no security, no remittances, but only mental bliss. No denied existence, and no insecurity of life or livelihood. Now, the ordeal that these hapless people had to go through, the number of deaths that had occurred while reversing their steps, sent a chill down the spine. We did look at the media, we did find in the media random road accident reports, slaughtered by freight train, dying of hunger and extreme stress. And the daily news reports were filled with the faces and stories of these invisible and faceless insignificant loss so far. And suddenly, they caught the attention of the common mass. And the basic question which rose to our minds was why? Could something be done to avoid this? Could a mode of transport be provided to them so that they could live peacefully the land of roses without stepping onto the thorns? They walked away from the employers, from the society, and refused to treat them as humans. From the society which suspected them of infecting others, endangering other people's lives. So they were ostracized by the same society who extracted their labor against a wage that was presumably higher from what they would have received in their own village. Now, given this backdrop, let us look at why people migrate. Now, this is a small brief digression that I'm making for the benefit of the students, because this background is very much relevant to what I'm going to speak a little later. Because all the issues that we have studied in the undergraduate classes regarding migration are relevant at this point of time. Okay? And we are questioning why this kind of treatment treatment was meted out to these hapless lots. Now, in our textbooks during our undergraduate days, we have learned about the push and the pull factors, as explained in the Harris-Soder model. And the primary push and pull factors has been the lack of suitable opportunities at the origin and a higher wage at the destination, coupled with ample opportunities. Now, again, migration can be distinguished between internal migration and cross-border or international migration. As Father Thadatil rightly pointed out, that we are all migrants in some form or the other. So, whatever we are about to discuss now is based on internal migration, that is within one political boundary. And internal migration can further be subdivided into rural to rural, rural to urban, urban to rural, and urban to urban, although the latter two are not very much significant. Now, what exactly is migration? Very simply put, migration is defined as the movement of people from one place to another across the political boundaries, which is the international migration, or within the national boundary, that is the internal migration. Thus, migration, I'm just going to reiterate Dr. Father Thadatil's words, migration is considered to be an integral part of the development process and an important factor in redistributing the population over time and space. Now, three things we need to keep in mind. First, migration starts at the origin and is completed at an area of destination. And social networking also motivates people to move from the same origin to the same destination. And that is why we have people of the same villages flocking into a particular area or a destination. I mean, very briefly regarding the trends and patterns of internal migration in India. The Economic Survey of India 2017 estimates that the magnitude of interstate migration in India was close to 9 million annually between 2011 and 2016. Now, Uttar Pradesh and Bihar are the biggest source states from where people migrate, followed closely by Madhya Pradesh, Punjab, Rajasthan, Uttarakhand, Jammu and Kashmir, and West Bengal. The major destination states, that is where people migrate, are Delhi, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, and of course Kerala. Now, most often the migration is seasonal, while in other cases, migrants stay on to accumulate some savings and send regular remittances for the family to survive at the origin. Thus, this remittance economy is crucial and critical for the survival and for the well-being of the family members at the origin. Reasons for migration are many besides the push and pull factors I just mentioned. Now, for female migrants, marriage, of course, has been considered to be the dominant reason. And among the males, the primary reason for migration has been predominantly to seek work or employment. However, while comparing between the two censuses, 2001 and 2011, it is found that there has been a decline in the percentage of population migrating in search of work or employment from approximately 15% in 2001 to roughly 10% in 2011. Now, this, of course, is a positive thing, which goes to show that economic opportunities are opening up at the origin, and hence people are less likely to leave home and search for work. The other critical reason for migration is the adverse land-man ratio. That is, the pressure on land resulting in disguised unemployment, reducing marginal productivity from land to zero following almost a check. Now, in fact, movement owing to marriage has increased from 44% in 2001 to 49% in 2011. there has been a decline in the proportion of migrants who moved with their families also. And migrating for education purpose has also declined over this decade. Now, regarding the streams of migrants, in case of interstate migrants, majority of the migration is from one rural area to another. Now, due to marriage in case of females and in search of work in case of males. Now, for interstate migrants, however, the flow is mainly towards urban areas, and it is primarily related to search of work, for work. According to 2001 census, around 53 million people migrated from one rural area to another rural area, the highest stream of migration that took place in the country. This was followed by rural to urban migration at 20 rates. Now, coming to the push and pull factors or the causes of internal migration. Firstly, rural to urban migration can be attributed to rapid urbanization that has taken place in India. Better wages and demand for workers in diverse activities, like in industry, trade, transport, services, and also the lure of the city life were the pull factors that lured a segment of the population residing in rural areas to leave their homes in search for a better life in the urban areas or the urban cities. And the urban amenities and medical and educational facilities also attract people to move to larger cities. And Shiliguri is a living example where it lives. The primary push factors behind rural to urban migration were firstly, lack of income earning opportunities at the origin, and secondly, the differential wages between rural and urban sectors. Seasonal fluctuations in demand for labor in agriculture also play an important role in driving people out in search of employment. Again, people seasonally migrate for employment in different areas and different industries. For example, significant number of people from drought-prone areas, for example, from areas of Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, and Maharashtra, migrate seasonally to work in brickmaking, construction, tile factories, and agricultural work. Such migration is both rural to rural and rural to urban. Circular migrants are also attracted by agricultural work, such as the rice harvesting season in West Bengal and the sugarcane harvesting season in Gujarat. Now, regarding the impact of internal migration, first of all, it fills the gap in demand for and supply of labor, and at the same time, efficiently allocates skilled and unskilled labor. But besides the demand for labor, another factor that allows the entry of workers in the urban industries and services is because of the availability of cheap labor. The second most important impact of internal migration is the remittances to the families in the areas of origin. Remittances ensure an enhanced level of well-being with increased consumption expenditure and, of course, investment in health, education, and asset accumulation. And if the migrants return to their origin on their own volition, he brings back his acquired skill and knowledge with which he can re-establish himself. However, this is subject to the demand for the output and marketing facilities thereof. Thus, migration enhances knowledge and skills of migrants through exposure and interaction with the outside world, along with intermingling cultures. Now, besides changing the demographics at the source, a serious impact of rural out-migration has been dearth of agricultural workers in several states. Again, increased male out-migration has led to feminization of agriculture that we have been reading of for quite some time now, and increased burden of work for women within and outside the household. Now, what about the impact on the destination areas, from where the migrants actually reverse their steps? Now, the impacts are manifold. The diaspora, which is created by the migrant population at the destination, is expected to have a positive contribution in terms of culture and societal progress and transfer of skills, aspects that are observed in case of international migration. However, in case of internal migrant population, the impact ranges from providing comparatively cheap labor to heavy pressure on urban infrastructure to growing slums and, of course, a change in the demographics skewed in favor of youth. Now, these are observed in case of migrants who occupy the lower rungs of the migrant worker group and the faceless people who actually walked back miles after miles when there was an economic crisis in the country. Finally, let us see what are the challenges and constraints that are faced by the migrant workers at the destination. Large number of workers get employed in the informal sector without any job security, and therefore they are vulnerable to any disruptions in the economy. They are subject to wage cuts, they are subject to joblessness, and with the lack of access to other urban amenities, they are forced to live in a deplorable condition in the slums. The irony of it is that the urban or the city lives that lured them to these places are resistant to accommodate them permanently. That's a clue I received from Father Sanchadi too. Thus, the issue of identity and social exclusion lies at the core of the problems faced by the migrant laborers. They have always remained as the other in the society. Now, lack of identity has several problems. They are refused the entitlements and social services, such as subsidized food, fuel, education, and health services that they are entitled to as economically backward classes. However, to safeguard the migrant workers, the Interstate Migrant Workers Act of 1979 sought to address the unjust working conditions of migrant workers. It is also expected that the various initiatives undertaken by the government will enhance livelihood opportunities for the rural population. For example, the National Rural Livelihood Mission, or NRLM, and the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, that is MIGRATE. Now, reason for this deep backdrop on internal migration is because each factor is linked to the topic under discussion. So, what actually led to this reverse migration of the thousands of migrant workers, which is only comparable to migration following partition of the country and migration to the tea gardens, which we are very much familiar with, tea gardens in Assam and North Bengal in the pre-independence era. Now, recently, I came across a very important document edited by Raunuddin Shankar, a noted political scientist and director of the Calcutta Research Group. The book entitled Borders of a Pandemic. This document actually asks the moot question: what indeed explains the sudden visibility of the migrant workers in the time of a public health crisis, which otherwise they have been invisible? Now, how do caste, race, gender, and other fault lines operate in the government strategies to cope with a virus epidemic? Now, if the fight against an epidemic has been compared with a war, what are the forces of power at play in this war against the pandemic? And Amartya Sen, in one of his interviews in the Indian Express, has mentioned that it can be treated as a war, but it is also a societal war, not only an economic war or a health war. Now, on the eve of March 24, 2020, the Prime Minister, the Government of India, and the Government of India announced complete lockdown of the country from midnight, with the statement, and I quote, "It is equally essential for your safety and that of your family. Jaan hai to jahan hai." If you have life, you have the world. Now, the Indian Express reports that this decision does not merely make labor migrants feeling deserted, but also impose insecurity and risk to their lives. It also brought to the fore some well-known challenges and typical nature of the Indian state in the time of crisis. What the most important challenge was the failure to assess how daily wage workers and others in the informal sector would react to such abrupt lockdown. The decision caught the migrants unaware, and so were we, and unprepared, and forced them to fend for themselves even in a crisis, a major health crisis. The lack of coordination between the central and the state governments became very evident. Even when the situation went out of control due to mass exodus of labor migrants, the blame game between the state and the center continued. The lack of preparedness that led to visibility of migrants on the road and the blame game among the political parties once again confirmed that the migrant body remains a politically contested one in their presence, absence, and even in transit. Now, Rituji Bandyopadhyay, in his article on migrant labor in formal economy and the logistics sector in COVID-19 world, cites the instance of the urban region of Chandigarh-Mohali region and argues that the issue of informal labor is at the heart of a logistical reorientation of economy, whose future is now uncertain in the wake of the pandemic. Therefore, it is no wonder that with the sudden announcement of the lockdown of the country, the labor vanished overnight, thus having serious implications in the labor market. It is the uncertainty of continued employment compounded by the uncertainty of the future of the economy caused the laborers to take such a drastic step, even to walk on foot, to travel hundreds of miles to their origin. Now, it just reminds me of the famous song of Bob Dylan. How many roads must a man walk down before you can call him a man? Further, it is extremely distressing to know that the same employers who extracted their labor to make fortunes out of their business treated the migrant laborers as untouchables, treating them as carriers of the disease. Thus, the hands that were valued for their work were now denied access to the very reason why they had migrated in the first place, that is, to exchange their physical labor for wages. Now, when this exchange stopped due to the lockdown, they were invisibilized by the society. Their services were no longer important. They could be dispensed with. Now, without any job security, while offering cheap labor, these migrants soon ran out of money and living conditions deteriorated, putting the very survival at stake. Even landlords refused them space without the house. So what could they do except to retrace their steps back? Without transportation, without money, without food, they walked. And they walked back to their destiny. The steps taken to contain the spread of the virus, though laudable, did not take into cognizance the perils of a large section of the population who relied on daily wages and daily work. This section of the migrant workers had everything to lose, nothing to gain with the lockdown. And that is why possibly they went on a denial at the humiliation that they had to face from the dominant community in the urban sector. They were the others who lacked in identity and therefore could easily be targeted as the carrier of the dreaded disease, an easy target to oust them from their society and render their labor dispensable in the wake of the pandemic. The Center for Monitoring Indian Economics, the CMIE, provided the disturbing figures that in May itself, 12 crore 20 lakh workforce has been rendered jobless, where majority were daily wage workers and small entrepreneurs, including the migrants. Now, Manish Jha and Ajit Pankaj, in one of their articles, quite an interesting one, titled Insecurity and Fear Travel as Labor Travels in the Time of Pandemic, talks of the unpreparedness of the city to the lockdown and the Now, further, it exposed the insecurity, fear, and precarity of the conditions of migrant workers. Now, what options did they have but to reverse their steps? The society that denied their existence, their identity, they had to look away from them. Some walked alone, some walked with families, with children, trying desperately to close the distance to their villages. Suddenly, they became visible, with the media springing into action. Now, with distraught pictures of road accidents, train accidents, and the disturbing pictures of children and women. Now, majority of the informal sector workers were street vendors, construction workers, rickshaw pullers, or worked in small units in the urban centers. Now, with lockdown, their work came to a standstill. Many were given wages, and many were not. They were promised to be given wages in the future. And the employers and contractors turned the other way. No one was held accountable for the loss of livelihoods of crores of people. Jha and Pankaj further points out, this is perhaps a classical example to understand the lack of accountability of the state, I quote, to the labor migrants in the neoliberal regime. State's minimum accountability, lack of social safety net, and hostility to labor's solidarity and resistance resulted in labor migrants as disposable, individualized, and powerless. Now, in contrast, interestingly, the state of Karnataka in India took an extreme measure to prevent the migrant workers from going back to their native state, even after 5 weeks into the lockdown, even forcing them to stay back as forced labor and denying them the freedom to move to their native state. This was despite the advisory of the government of India to the contrary. The hunger pangs forced them to reverse their steps, and they decided to flee the cities that turned a blind eye towards them, and abandoning them to die of starvation. And hence they walked. Now, Parthu Mukherjee and Mukta Naik from Center for Policy Research report that migrant workers distrust a state that does not take them into account. They proceeded to mention that governments converted the highways to shelters and issued on orders to turn the stadia into temporary jails at a time when other countries were turning them into hospitals. One can offer reasons why the walking continued. Poor implementation of meal programs, low awareness, the standing Rabi crop which was waiting to be harvested, and the fleeting possibility of an assured transport, which brought migrants to the streets even in Kerala, where they had thus far accepted their confinement far from home. But at the heart, their walking conveys a deep distrust of the state, especially when it promises assistance. They act as if the offer is a diversionary tactic to make them relevant by a wild state, which will go back to being its uncaring self once they do. And of course, there is the pull of home, the need to be together with the family at this time of radical uncertainty, to draw strength from each other, to be on familiar ground to combat whatever might come in their lives. Therefore, our cities have always been an has always been exclusionary to migrants. And even today, the reasons we want them to stay put is to protect ourselves. Now, Jha and Pankaj further makes a very strong point where they mention that the migrants was reduced to their lives while the state disowned them. While not all the migrants are equally affected in times of pandemic, those belonging to the lower socioeconomic strata of society and having poor capacity to stay in the city are often amongst the most vulnerable at the time of increased risk and uncertainty. The distressing spectacle of migrants brought sympathy from people like us. We were willing to do charity, but the migrants did not want charity, nor did they want to be humiliated and sterilized. They just wanted to and that it could not be arranged for them in a proper way was a sham. But this walk does not end here, tragically. Many who could make it to the state or district or village were further subjugated to indignity of their bodies. Sorry. They were further subjected to indignity of their bodies. This still were the carrier of the diseases, and therefore they were sprayed into disinfectants, made to wait for endless hours, isolation centers, which itself was in a very deplorable condition. Those who could return to their homes were eyed with suspicion, and police forcefully again separated them from their families. While taking precaution was a necessity, but by subjugating the migrants to further humiliation by their own society was heart-wrenching. Thus, the return of the migrants was not only an economic issue, but also a social issue to grapple with. It exposed not only the plight of such a vulnerable group of people, but it also exposed the social hierarchy amidst the pandemic, which was ready to disregard the migrant bodies, treating them as carrier of the disease. A well thought out plan to prevent the spread of the virus could have also prevented the loss of lives of many migrants, and also could have prevented the loss of social and humanitarian values amongst the people, and most importantly, could have saved hundreds and thousands of these migrant populations from being humiliated and disgraced in front of the whole world. Now, there were some experts from the media which I just mentioned, just to drive the point. The media, which is the print, in March reported that people coming from outside the state are facing the same social stigma that HIV patients have faced. The frustration and anger amongst the migrant laborers of being subjected to social boycott can be gauged by an incident in Jehanabad district in Bihar, where a government team was pelted with stones when it went to take some laborers who had returned from Delhi to the hospital for COVID-19 tests. Now, a social boycott, this social boycott of the daily wagers, is not just restricted to one district, but it was across all the states. Now, coming back, despite the nationwide lockdown, there were a number of migrants who were returning to their villages. In fact, in Bihar, overnight there were at least in one day there were 50,000 migrant laborers who had returned from Delhi itself. Now, while several state governments initially were not inclined to bring back migrant workers for fear that they will spread the disease, later both Bengal and Bihar government declared that migrants would be transported to their native villages. But the damage had already been done, and the local villagers were often boycotting the returning migrants out of fear. Finally, let us see what might be the economic impact of this kind of a reverse migration. At the destination, there will now be a shortage of laborers to work at the lower wages. The demand-supply gap of workers will raise their wages, which will be met by downsizing the units, that means job cuts, that will result in further unemployment. The economic changes that might occur in the near future with the return of the migrants to the origin are firstly, the flow of remittances having stopped. The economic condition of the households will deteriorate. With no income earning opportunities at present, their acquired skill and knowledge will be wasted. Manrega will provide some support to the village population, but raising the number of days and the number of people is of utmost need. While the MSME support, an additional 80 crore people were to be sent by the government till November, is definitely a welcome gesture. The future of these crores of people still remain uncertain in the absence of any concrete planning by the government. With the despicable experience of this migrant workforce, it will take a long time for them to step out in search of work from the safe and secure confines of their home, while living a life with dignity despite the poverty situation. They will continue to live with the trauma and uncertainty and the humiliation for a long time. And while the village economy will find surplus hands, that means disguised unemployment once again, there is every possibility that excess supply of agricultural laborers will depress the wages, further lowering the economic status of the households, which in turn will decrease the purchasing power of the population. All this will have a negative impact on production and employment, further slowing down the economy. This will again propel the out-migration of people seeking work and employment in the urban sector. Now, this is the vicious circle that we had studied in our undergraduate classes, but we had never foreseen that the pandemic will provide us with a living illustration of it. The pandemic, in all its ugliness, has exposed the economic insecurity of majority of the people in India and in the rest of South Asia. On an optimistic note, however, for India, hopefully, India is going to adopt policies that will ensure the retention of the workforce by providing support to businesses to recover the loss, besides what has been provided to MSMEs. People need to be fed before they can think of others. And that assurance that is basic for survival is of utmost urgency, along with the assurance of getting proper and adequate healthcare services during the pandemic. Now, policy responses by the government must be grounded in human, women's, and labor rights and child rights. Cash grants and cash transfers may provide temporary relief and some support to uphold the right to subsistence standard of living for those who have lost their income as a result of COVID-19, including those who are unable to earn their livelihoods because of caregiving responsibilities. Nevertheless, the ground situation is quite distressful, and as apprehended by economists like us, the migrant workers are again being forced to leave their comfort zone of their own village. While they do live with the trauma, they are again retracing their steps to the cities where they would find work at higher wages to fill the bellies of the family members and themselves. While information of trains from Malda in North Bengal, where they reside, are once again teeming with passengers who are mostly the migrant workers going back to the cities, ignoring the risk of getting infected. The print media also confirms such news too. 3 months after being flown home from various parts of India to Jharkhand, Jharkhand is still struggling. Jharkhand still struggling migrants now want to return to the city. The Jharkhand government is trying to desperately to generate jobs under Manrega and is launching new schemes, but workers are struggling with low wages and lack of money. Thus, the observation that I had mentioned earlier, that there will be dearth of workers in cities for some time to come, belies the reality that people are willing to risk their lives in the pandemic rather than endure the pangs of hunger and poverty back home. Yet, it is a double-edged sword. Either you die of hunger or you die of the pandemic. And therefore, they are willing to risk their lives. Yet, the pandemic was sudden and without warning all over the world. Some developed nations already had a road, while we Indians, we are trying a multimodal approach to grapple with the challenges, including that of soaring unemployment rate among the migrant workers. All Indians are optimistic by birth, and I do firmly believe that given our resilience and the size of the domestic economy, this too shall pass. Thank you, dear listeners, for giving me your patience here.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Though we encountered some apparent problem with the sound, I think uh, still we got to attend your very interesting and very detailed take about this the situation that is going on in the prevalent pandemic, mainly for the migrant workers and laborers. And in the same context, we have some questions from our participants. Since we are short of time, we will only be able to take 2 or 3 questions. So, first question, I will try to present one question that would maybe cover the questions query of 2 participants. So, the question is from Noel Giri. As we have observed that uh, large number of reverse migration been occurred in the North Bengal, which belongs to academic population of secondary and senior secondary level. Do you think government policies, namely NRLM, MNREGA, short-term skill development training, are enough to make their livelihood pace on track? What are the socio-economic opportunities do you observe from such reverse migrant population in North Bengal? So the question basically asks that the population of migrants who have returned in North
Vicky,
Bengal.
can I request
Yes,
something? Can you take two or
yes,
three
ma'am.
questions together? Because all of these might be related, So
Yes, ma'am.
just
That
to
is what.
check,
2 questions
yes.
we
Can
have
you
from North
take them
Bengal. Okay, I'm
and
taking three
answer
questions
it?
here. Yeah, there are 3 questions that are related. I'm taking that. So Noel Giri asks, since the most of the major chunk of migrant population from North Bengal, that is mainly from Darjeeling Hills, are of secondary and senior secondary level of education. So, do you think that the government policies like NRLM, MNREGA, and skill development training are enough to bring their livelihood back on track? What are the socio-economic opportunities that you observe from such reverse migration? Another related question is, ma'am, there have been studies that suggest that migrant laborers returning back to their native place may encourage investment and employment generation at those places. What are your views on that? So these are some related questions that we have, ma'am. If you could answer these.
Okay, I'll just take them together.
Yes, ma'am.
Both the questions actually relate to North Bengal. But I'll not restrict myself to North Bengal. I'll give a generalized view. First of all, you said you talked about the migrant population. You were asking about the migrant population who had secondary or high secondary level of education who are not returning. So I would like to call them as semi-skilled migrants. Now, the migrant population that had reversed their steps mostly, as I mentioned in my lecture, they were the lower rungs of the migrant population. That means who are unskilled and semi-skilled, who actually went to cities or to rural areas to work, and therefore they were returning to their native places because they were now out of jobs. Now, coming back to the native places, yes, Banrega, they have increased the number of days from 100 to 150 now, and therefore there is a short, what you can say, a temporary relief. But as I mentioned, they are again retracing their steps back, because this is not enough. While you mentioned in the second question that yes, as I mentioned that some of the workers who gain skills and knowledge because of the exposure in the cities and by skill and training, if they come back, yes, if they have accumulated some sort of an investment, some sort of savings and assets, they can come back and invest. But as I mentioned, if they are investing in a product which has very little marketability, then they will not succeed. So the state has to step in. They cannot work on their own. The state measures, the state principles. See, there are two ways of thinking. In fact, Amartya Sen very rightly pointed out about this, that these people who are actually not given place neither in census nor in NSSO data, they have suddenly become visible to us. We never inquired how many migrant workers from a particular village actually left for another city. We never inquired that. But the point that these pictures which were visible now have made us sit up to understand there are hundreds and thousands of migrant workers who have out-migrated from North Bengal, from all over India to various regions or destination areas. And if they are retracing their steps, then the economy at the origin must be revamped. The first thing why they left the village was because there were no opportunities for them. And landman pressure was very high. So there is very little land compared to the number of people who are working on it. And therefore people had to move out. So not only the landman ratio, adverse landman ratio needs to be corrected, it cannot be corrected because land is inelastic. But at the same time, we need to think in terms of non-farm opportunities. So unless and until these opportunities are created, you cannot think of the migrant population coming back and resettling at the origin. Unless they have come back with huge investments where they can divert or invest, huge savings where they can invest in projects which are major projects, but not small projects, and major projects which is going to give them a return, which is going to give them a continued return. And therefore, what is most important at the village level is to develop programs that are sustainable livelihoods, not temporary livelihoods, because this will force out migration from the villages. And therefore, a participatory governance is very much important. Participatory governance which is sparked or motivated by public discussion. And that is why webinars like these become so important. Because all of us listening to it and discussing it can also raise the public opinion, which is then transmitted to the government. And these kind of public discussions where we motivate the government to empathize with the migrant population and therefore design strategies where you can provide them with sustainable livelihoods. Thank you.
Ma'am, there is another question related. I think we could take this very interesting question from one of our students, and I will merge it with another question that is also very important. Monomita Sarkar asks, as per some economists, direct cash transfer is much more effective to marginal rural migrants to increase their purchasing power. Do you agree on this? And another is from our student Aditya Singh. He says, do migrant workers take away job from the low-income native workers? The migrant workers who return back, do they take away jobs from the low-income native workers?
Okay, yes, they are interesting questions. Well, me personally, as an economist, I'm not in favor of cash transfers, like doling money to living under destitution or under poverty. But during those 3 months of lockdown, where people lost their jobs drastically and they had to reverse their debts, they had to go to the origin, which also had nothing to earn. Now, at that point of time, why food subsidies and DF system were more or less enough to provide them with food, but they did not have any cash in hand. Now, with the lack of money, obviously the demand for or their purchasing power or their purchasing capacity is sure to fall. And this again, as I said while I was talking towards the end, that if you do not have the purchasing power, then obviously the demand for any other allied goods or services are going to decline. And this will have a multiplier effect in a negative way. That means this will lead to further joblessness of those sectors which might have provided the services to these people. Like, for example, even in urban cities, we are cutting down everything. We are cutting down on our budget. The budget which we lived on as salaried people, we are trying to restrict our budget to the bare minimum because we have faced a pandemic where there has been an economic crisis, where there has been salary cuts, where there has been downsizing of units and joblessness. And therefore, it is very important that we now restrict our consumption expenditure to the bare minimum. Now, similarly, if we think in terms of the migrant workers who have gone back pretty measure. And I'm sorry, what was the second question?
The second question was that the migrant workers who are coming back, do they take away jobs
sorry,
from
I remember. Yes. That whether they are going to displace the native workers or not.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, see, at the origin, already the native workers means the people who are residing at the origin. Okay, the people already at the origin, either they are already employed in the agriculture or the rural sector or in non-farm sector. Okay. Now, once these migrant population are back, if they are unable to use their skills, they are going to be wasted, which I mentioned. Now, already, if I find that there has been a saturation point in the sustainable livelihood programs at the origin, then the migrant workers will not be able to displace any of the native workers. They will continue to work, especially if you look at the statistics. Actually, agriculture has been the least affected during the pandemic because the harvesting and the crop seasons in the rural areas, they have continued. People have come back to harvest. They are able to sell their products because food grains are now in high demand because people have to be fed. So the agriculture sector has not been much affected. But what has been affected is the number of people now working. There will be surplus labor in the agricultural sector. And as for the non-farm sector, if people are already employed there, I have little doubt that they will experience any kind of displacement. In fact, the only displacement that can occur is in terms of a job cut or joblessness, which can already have taken place, which irrespective of whether the migrant population has gone back to the village or not. Okay, it's because of the recession that the global economy or the domestic economy is already facing. So my take on it is that they are not going to displace the native workers.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Since we have 2 more minutes left, I think we can take one final question since it is becoming a very interactive uh, experience. So this one is from Indrajit Baidakya. He asks that the CMIE data also shows that the employment rate has been down to 8% in August
Yes.
2020. So does that mean all those who have returned back got absorbed into the employment channel, or is the data unreliable?
Not exactly. It is not that all the migrants have gone back to the cities. It is not that. Very few are now retracing their steps. They have started retracing. But as I said, that government is trying to assure that people who had been jobless, who had lost their jobs, a part of them is again being absorbed in the job sector. Now, see, a major take on the economic revival is that the manufacturing sector has to be revived. Okay. Now, this manufacturing sector requires both skilled and semi-skilled workers. So some of this kind of revival now is like they are absorbing some of the semi-skilled workers, but at the same time, people are now engaging themselves into different kinds of activities. Now, if you look around, even in Shiliguri or in Kolkata or in some of the major cities where you will find that many people who had been jobless are now be getting employed in a completely different stream. Like, for example, I'll talk about people from the say in the private sector. Some of them, many of them have lost their jobs because of the downsizing. But now, what are they what are they going to do right now? Because they are jobless, they do not have their wages or their salaries. So they are taking up other options. So they are employed into something which is not their skill or their educational background are allowing them to do. For example, they are opening a catering business. For example, they are working in offices as junior clerks. They might operate as a senior executive position in a private sector. So the point is that they are getting absorbed into sectors like uh, the services sector, like the delivery system. They have there is a spurt in the delivery providers. Okay, and the people are getting absorbed there. Now, regarding the transport, safety transport is now being provided. So the Uber and everything, people even in like I'm presently in Kolkata, I am taking an Uber to go to a place, okay, because they are providing a sanitized environment. So this is the key word now, the hashtag sanitized. Okay, we are providing you with sanitizers. We are providing you with proper place where you have no fear of of getting infected. We are giving you face guards. So everything avoiding now provider of services which are going to safeguard your health. And therefore, people who are now presently jobless are now getting employed in sectors which actually requires more hands now. But people of different educational background are also taking up these jobs because they are presently unemployed. So this is one of the main reasons why there has been a spurt in the or lowering of the unemployment rate. It is not because all the migrant workers have gone back. A few of them may have gone back. A few of them may have been absorbed in the native place also, because of there are increase in the livelihood. Manrega number of days. There have been a lot of other services that have been provided in the rural areas, and therefore there has been a spurt in the employment sector and a downsize and the going down of the unemployment rate. So it is not exactly related to migrant laborers, but nonetheless, there are
evidences that some of the migrant laborers are getting absorbed even at the native places. Okay.
Thank you so much, ma'am. This was such an engaging session, and I hope most of our participants could get the answers they were looking for. Now, I would like to call upon
Thank you so much.
Miss
Thank you,
Miss
everybody.
Bhavana Khati to deliver the vote of thanks. Ma'am, please take the.
Thank you, BK sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, yes, ma'am, you are audible. Please
Okay.
continue.
Okay. On behalf of the Department of Economics, Department of Geography, IQAC, and Salesian College Siliguri, I take this pleasure to propose the vote of thanks for today's webinar session. I would like to express my hearty and sincere gratitude to Professor Sanchadi Roy Mukherjee for being with us and giving us a deep insight and vast understanding of the plight of migrant workers who are one of the most affected groups during this time of pandemic. It was really a thought-provoking session, ma'am. Thank you so much. I would like to thank Father Principal George Tharathil, who is also the chairman of the IQAC, the Vice Principal for Science, Father Aju Kurian, who is also the IQAC coordinator, and Vice Principal for Arts, Father CJ George, for the ever-inspiring endeavors and always guiding us the right path. I would like to thank an important team behind organizing webinars, the tech team of Salesian College Siliguri, who has been persistently helping us with their technical knowledge. A very big thanks to the entire team, especially Ms. Yadika Prasad, who has constantly helped us with the technicality anytime required. Thank you, ma'am. Last but not the least, the vote of thanks would be incomplete without thanking such wonderful participants with whose presence we have been able to successfully complete the second day of the webinar. Your presence is highly appreciated, and we hope to see you in the upcoming days with the same energy and enthusiasm shown in today's webinar. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
I would now like to invite Father George Tharathil, Principal, Salesian College, to kindly keep some words.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, Father, you are audible.
Okay. So, Madam, once again, thank you very much. And thanks to all the participants. Thanks to the organizing team, Vicky and Bhavna and Sharing and Vipul and Srijana and all of you. And please announce tomorrow's timing and the topic so that those who have been with us today will also keep joining us tomorrow. I think we are the gainers after having listened to such a enlightening lecture, and also the way in which Madam very specifically went into the details in answering those questions. And I think in some of these occasions, that's where we really see both the listening person's kind of intuitions and insights and perceptions, and how the speaker addresses those issues. That was nice listening to you all and being with you all. Thank you and bye.
Thank you, everyone. Mainly our speaker for today, Sanchadi ma'am, for attending us despite her busy schedule and her engagements. It was a wonderful session. We had a lot to take from this session, mainly because it is something the issue is something very close to us. It is something that we come across every day. We live with the issue right now. We are living with the issue. We are seeing it. We are feeling it. So thank you, ma'am, for enlightening us in many ways over the issue. Tomorrow we have with us Dr. Sohail Firdos at 11:30 a.m. again. He will be talking about land and food and land use systems. So it is again going to be a very interesting topic. Dr. Sohail Firdos is an associate professor at the Department of Geography, Sikkim University, and he is also heading the department. So I hope to see you all again tomorrow for yet another compelling and very engaging session. Thank you all for being with us today, for being such a participative and such a wonderful audience. Thank you so much. So we end our session for here today. Thank you so much.